Hello, guys and girls. So, I want to touch base a little bit on call logging today because a lot of people aren't realizing how important it is to keep track of everything going on. I use Parts Tracker. I highly recommend it. If you have Brunswick, use your Brunswick. If you have Cubic AMFs, whoever you have, if you already have tracking software, make sure you're using it. If you can't afford it, use paper and pencil. It is what it is. You got to use what you got to use. Parts Tracker, I believe, was just under $500, but it's worth it. Every penny of it. The reason why call logging is so important is because when you're coming in after not being at work for a couple of days, if you're coming into the center, if you're out of town for a week, if you're out of town for a month, whatever it is, when you come in, you need to know what's going on. Not everyone always remembers what they've done throughout the day, which is why as you go through the day, if you're able to log your calls while you're working, you're not going to have to try to remember all that. This is an outdated database for our logs, so I'm having to go back several weeks. But just going through and being able to see what's happening, when it's happening, and knowing what's going on makes all the difference in the world. If you walk into your shift the next morning and you got the desk people say, "Oh, it was a pure shit show last night," or whatever, your bosses are looking at you like, we're spending a whole bunch of money and it seems like there's a whole lot of calls. Now, a whole lot of calls is very, very dependent on who's saying it. There could be these people on lane 3 that think that their machine broke down 15, 20 times. You look at a call log, even if it's being meticulously maintained, they've only got 3 calls. Our machine was down all night. That's why we couldn't get done on time. Boss comes at you. What was going on with this pair? You need to be able to show them nothing. Nothing was going on. Here's the 3 calls I got. This is why this is important, because if you're the pin chaser, you're covering your butt to say, okay, here's what I was running around doing all night. I couldn't get my cleaning done because of these machines. It's a bogus line, but I've heard it. If there's enough calls to make up for it, it is what it is. If you're a mechanic, you need to know what you need to be doing throughout the day. So if you've got 50, 60, 70 calls from the night before, you know what you need to be chasing down. If you're the head mechanic, you're looking at your calls on a week-to-week basis, week-to-week or month-to-month basis, you need to know what you're working on. So doesn't matter if you're a pin chaser, a mechanic, a head mechanic, an owner, a manager, whatever. If you're anywhere near these machines, anything that you touch should be logged. And the reason why you log it is so that everybody else knows at all times exactly what's happening. Now, the biggest point to a completed call log is being able to, when you're going to work on a machine, it gives you the basis of what you're going to start to look for. Having somebody just say, well, yeah, I had 6 respots yesterday. Okay, what'd you respot? Well, it must have been the scissors because it was all the 6. But you go back and look at the call log, and they respot the 4, then they respot the 3, then they respot the 610, then they respot the 710, then they respot the 8-9. Okay, so why are the 6-pin scissors bad? I had this example, what was it, I guess it was a couple months ago now. Somebody said, well, I got in there and I fixed it. It was easy. I just replaced these 2 sets of scissors. So those 2 sets of scissors were causing the constant cycle? Well, the only problem it had when I was here was this. I said, yeah, that's not the issue I had. The issue I had was every time the machine came up, it dropped right back down and cycled through, so I had to reset the pins. Well, it turns out the dash pot was loose. Okay, well, if the dash pot was loose, then it wasn't a simple fix of replacing the scissors, now was it? Because that's what management got to hear. Right, so this is why your call log is important, because you need to be able to go through, and if you got, whether it's respots, whether it's jamming the bucket, and especially, that's one of the things I like about this system, is that you're able to not only log the call itself, and I have these calls broken down pretty far to do half the troubleshooting just in knowing what the call was, but you can put down what pins were the issue. So if you got a jam in the bucket, it's jamming in the 7 pin. If you got a jam on top of the deck, and it's jamming at the 8 pin. If you're constantly respotting 1 pin or 2 pins, knowing exactly where to start looking is going to make all the difference in the world. Versus, okay, well, we have a lot of respots on 10. We got a lot of respots on 12, I believe it was, at one point. When you say the problem is we have a lot of respots, and you don't have it broken down to respot versus add pin versus stand pin, and you don't have it written down to exactly which pin, well, you've just left yourself a big wide area of what you're looking for to fix to reduce the respots. Because especially if everybody's jumping on top of the machine to respot pins, like on an A2, or if they're doing it on a 8270, if you're climbing up there and you're putting the pins in the buckets instead of knocking them down, well, you don't get the test of seeing if it's your cycle. You don't get the test to see if it's your scissors. If you're actually dropping the pins from the back, you're testing both of those when you do your respot. And if you're putting that in your comments, if you're putting that in the log, then you can break it down to, okay, well, this looks like it's obviously customers reset the machine. So this is why our call logs are very important. Even on here, you'll see we do have by week. I know exactly how many calls there are. Well, I know how many calls are logged each week right here. I'll know what the call types are by clicking here, so that I can go through and break down the bulk calls versus the pin calls versus cycle and everything else. Or I can look at machine calls. I also take this whole thing and I export it from Parts Tracker. I'll export the weekly call logs to Excel so that I can send a basic breakdown to my bosses. That way they can see, okay, what is and isn't changing from week to week. How many calls are we getting? What calls are we getting? Anything else? And when you get all the way to the front here, I've got the yearly total. So it's all the same calls, but it's the entire book of weeks 1 through 52 of what all the calls are and the basic breakdown of whether it's a bulk call, respot, 180, yada yada. When these numbers get to a certain point, it tells you that nothing's getting done about it. If they're staying steady, the same amount of calls each from week to week, you know they're not getting fixed. They're not getting the attention they deserve. But at the same time, if the call log is actually complete, like if you're not just clicking to click and you're putting in all the information for the call, then whoever's coming in after you is not having to try to figure out from scratch what's going on. Like this call here, other blackout, with the asterisk telling you leave a note. There's no note. Lane 8 is blacked out with no note. Okay, let me come back and fix that later. Yeah. Okay, so it was blacked out. Well, I guess I'll check the electrical box, I'll check the breakers, I'll check everything else and see if there's an issue. But if it blacked out once and it wasn't a specific blackout, like if it wasn't a jam on top of the deck, what am I going to look at later? So it's on everybody working together and getting the call log complete, so that when somebody else is coming in and they're fixing all the things that get left behind, they need to know what they're going after. That's why our call logs are so important. And it doesn't matter if they're called to the back or if they're things that you found while walking around. Because, I mean, if you're walking across the back and you see balls of the Y track, you're going to push those balls through. Well, that's still a call. You need to go log that, because if they call it back twice and you've pushed them through 12 times, well, having 2 calls is not going to tell me that there's an issue there if it's actually been 14 times where the ball's been stuck. So this is why everybody's working together to make the building better, to make all the machines better, because everybody's going for the same end goal, where the less work we have to do on a day-to-day basis, the less calls we have to chase, the better. So make sure that make sure you and people above and below you, as hard as it is to make sure people above you do calls, make sure that all the calls are logged completely and properly. Now, whichever way you do it, that's up to you, but they all need to be logged. And the more logging we get done, the more that somebody else coming in to help out, or when you're reaching out for help and you're trying to say, why do I have so many calls? You can give them information about what calls you're getting, how often they're happening, and it allows you to get a more accurate response. So with that, I will, like I said, I'll leave a link to Parts Tracker in the description below. It's early. It's 4:00 in the morning. You can see that on the screen there. Just make sure that everything's getting logged, so that you cover your butt, you cover everybody else's butt. You're able to get issues resolved much faster. You're able to know what issues to go look for, and you're able to show your management and your ownership what's happening with the time, what's happening with the machines, where their money is going. So that is all I have for today. If anybody wants more of a breakdown of Parts Tracker, I can go through it more in a later video. It's too late tonight, and I just wanted to make sure that the basics of call logging were covered. I mean, make sure, again, as much information as you can put in makes the whole difference in the world.